Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this first in the series of summits which the City Government is holding about key issues. So, my name is Mary Hunter and I'm the City Convener for Health and Social Care. And just to make you aware, this event is being live streamed on YouTube, so if you ask a question, you will be on YouTube. If anybody has any problems with that, come up and just have a wee word with me later on, but it's just to make you aware. So welcome to this summit, which is on housing and homelessness, and particularly focused on the issue of rough sleeping in Glasgow. And I'm now going to test to see if this clicker thing works. And no, it doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. So why are we here? Well, housing and homelessness are a priority issue for the City Government. A lot has been done, and we'll hear about that later on today, but there's also an awful lot still to do. So the purpose of today is firstly to develop a shared understanding of the individuals who are sleeping rough in Glasgow. It's very easy to look at homelessness simply as an outcome of the supply of housing, but particularly when you're looking at rough sleeping, it's very much also about the circumstances of individuals, and we want to keep the circumstances and problems and needs of those individuals at the forefront of our discussion about this. We're also here to look at ongoing partnership work, to look at what's already being done, to hear from our partners and to hear from people with lived experience, because it's vital that they are at the centre of this. We're also here to listen to some critical voices. There are people in this room who have been quite critical of some of the things that the Council has done. As political leaders, it's important for us to listen to criticism. It's also important, I think, for people who have been critical, not simply to take that position, but to realise that, we're here to listen to you, our door is open, and we want to work with you to improve things. And what are the outcomes we're looking for here? Well, we're looking to agree political and partnership leadership, to drive forward the solutions to rough sleeping, to establish the Rough Sleeping Taskforce that we talked about in our manifesto. This is a first step in that process. I don't expect that by the end of this we'll have our Rough Sleeping Taskforce established, but I think we'll have a pretty clear idea of what it's going to do, and we'll have a fairly clear idea of who's going to be on it. It's essential that we take a partnership approach on this, not simply in terms of the professionals, but also a political partnership. There are councillors here from every party in Glasgow, and that's indicative of the fact that we want to work together on this, and we want to pull together to deal with this issue, because it's something which is of huge concern to people across the city. Okay, so that's just giving you a wee outline of why we're here. And now I'm going to hand over to Suzanne Miller. Many of you will already know Suzanne. If you don't, she's the Chief Officer of Strategy Planning and Commission and the Chief Social Work Officer in Glasgow.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hunter, and good morning. I'm delighted to see so many people here today. I'd said to Councillor Hunter, who's our convener, that if the biggest problem we have today is managing the logistics of the number of people who've shown an interest in homelessness and people with complex needs, then that's a good problem to have. So you're very welcome, and thanks very much for making the effort to come along this morning. I'll see if this works for me. What I wanted to do this morning was really to give you some context in which we would want to talk about people with multiple and complex needs, some of whom end up rough sleeping in our city. To look at some of the definitions of what multiple and complex needs are, but also to give you some examples of case studies, because I think sometimes an abstract discussion is quite difficult So we've done some work within the Health and Social Care Partnership in terms of case studies of people with multiple and complex needs. And I wanted to share that with you because I think quite often that helps our thinking in terms of solutions. One of the observations in terms of the case studies that as a group, a multi-agency group, looked at the case studies including statutory and third sector. And initially we felt quite overwhelmed by some of the issues that were coming from that group. But what we then did was we looked at a couple of examples where we have, as a partnership, and when I say partnership, I mean partnership across statutory and third sector agencies, managed to intervene successfully in terms of improving outcomes for people with multiple and complex needs. So conscious that we need to be able to offer you this morning some examples of where we have intervened successfully and start to think about what success might look like. As Councillor Hunter says, we have been working on these issues for a long time within the city, and we are working on a number of solutions, particularly in that partnership approach across the Health and Social Care Partnership, Council Family, and with our third sector partners. So I'm really pleased today that the stage, if you like, has been shared very particularly by those third sector partners, and very open, as is our convener, to hearing some of those critical voices, but also some of the solutions that have come from our partners in the third sector. In terms of the context, I just briefly wanted to say the City Government was really clear that the focus of this first summit was about people who are rough sleeping or people with multiple and complex needs. But there is a context to consider that population. So we do have as a city a homelessness strategy for 2017 to 20, which was developed by a multi-agency group and approved by the Integrated Joint Board. So there is a context within which we'll consider this specific group, and there is a wider group of people who experience homelessness or are at risk of homelessness. And I know colleagues from GHN will touch on some of the causes of homelessness in that wider group as well. We do have an improvement plan. We have colleagues from Scottish Government and the Housing Regulator here this morning, and you will be aware that the Housing Regulator is working with Glasgow City on a voluntary basis in relation to our challenges in meeting needs at the point of crisis every day. So we do have an improvement plan, and one which has been subject to an accountability meetings with the Housing Regulator. And that's been a really effective and constructive relationship for us within the statutory sector. It's allowed us to look quite critically at some of the issues for us and to develop that improvement plan. Equally, there is a focus in the city on early intervention and prevention. So whilst it's absolutely important that we focus on that group at the high end in terms of multiple and complex needs, it needs to be done in the context of what it is we're doing at the other end, so that in actual fact we're not continuing to create situations which, if we address these issues, we've got more people coming through. So there's a really clear early intervention and prevention strategy, particularly based around about housing options, and we have a successful relationship with our colleagues in the RSL sector in relation to the development and implementation of housing options. A very good evaluation in terms of a positive impact that that's had. There's been lots of work on emergency, temporary and supported accommodation across the city. We recently, as a council, opened 2 new emergency accommodation in the city. And there's ongoing work in terms of the modernisation and investment in relation to that. The other big part of our strategy is access to housing. And again, we've been working with our colleagues in the RSL sector in terms of access to housing. What we have acknowledged in that partnership approach is that we don't have a housing supply issue. We've established that. We have evidence we don't have a housing supply issue. We continue to need to work on the access of people who are homeless to housing, and we've just recently agreed to commission a piece of work that will identify for us where the blockages are. We know that we're not getting enough people quickly enough through from the decision in relation to them being homeless into accommodation. And we have agreed to do more work with colleagues in the housing sector to identify what the blockages are there and what it is that we need to do as a partnership to address those blockages. So really just wanted to put that in context. The focus is on multiple and complex needs, but that doesn't happen in isolation. Making sure that the clicker works is hindered somewhat by the fact that I've taken my glasses off and I am extremely short-sighted. That's not moved, has it? You have the presentation in front of you. Apologies that I have absolutely no idea what it says on the screen at the back of the room. I can't actually see past David Bookbinder at the front either. The definition, there is a definition of people who have multiple and complex needs. And part of the conversation with our convener about the focus this morning was that whilst we absolutely want to focus on those people who last night tonight will be sleeping on the streets in Glasgow, the definition of multiple and complex needs allows us, I think, to consider that population in terms of those at risk. What we know about our rough sleeping population is looking at a snapshot does not tell us enough about what the issues are. And if we only looked at a snapshot of what's happening last night or tonight in the city, then that wouldn't provide us with the solutions to people who have to sleep on the streets. So the definition of multiple and complex needs includes that much wider population who are in and out of rough sleeping, are in and out of temporary and emergency accommodation, who are at risk of rough sleeping. And again, the conversation we've had with our convener is that the focus in terms of rough sleeping has to look at multiple and complex needs, because that's the way that we'll find lasting solutions in relation to the issue of rough sleeping. So I've used the UK definition of what multiple and complex needs are. So it's people who have been homeless, including those in temporary or unsuitable accommodation and involving sleeping rough, and generally have experienced one or more of institutional care, substance misuse, what's called participation in street culture activities, which includes people involved in begging, street drinking, survival, shoplifting or sex work. In Glasgow, through our homelessness strategy, we've added to that people who've suffered abuse, trauma or exploitation. Because again, our experience, particularly in Tomorrow's Zoo in Glasgow, which I'll come on to talk about, is that the experience of trauma and abuse and exploitation is a significant feature in that population of people with multiple and complex needs. So it's really important for us to consider that, particularly in terms of our prevention work and what's happening with young people who are at risk in our city. Thank you very much. My lovely assistant, well, because she can see. Thank you very much. The discussion on multiple and complex needs and rough sleeping, I've been working in homelessness for a number of years and have responsibilities across a range of services in health and social work in the city. And there has been an ongoing debate, dialogue in relation to the numbers of people who are rough sleeping. So I want to give you some of those numbers, but I also want to caution against us having a fixated discussion about numbers, because I think that discussion on numbers, debate and exchange of views on the numbers last night, tonight, tomorrow night, I think distracts from the much more powerful and necessary conversation, which is about what are the solutions. So my experience of some of those discussions about trying to reach a consensus on numbers is that it's important up to a point. I think we're at that point, we've gone beyond that point, and the challenge that we have in front of us is to talk about solutions. However, I know that people are interested in the numbers. We do have a street service that works in the city who on a routine basis are coming into contact with 25 to 30 people who are sleeping rough at any one point. The winter shelter, which colleagues from City Mission and Govan Law Centre will talk about later on, averaged this year about 29 people using that service per night. However, given that what I'm suggesting and I'm proposing that we talk about this morning is multiple and complex needs, and that move away from talking about that much smaller number who are on our streets of an evening. I think one of the most recent pieces of work that we did in the city was a piece of work round about the Taking Away the Chaos, which was a public health survey in terms of our public drug injecting population. And there's something for me that's a reasonable proxy for those numbers with multiple and complex needs, because by definition, People who are stable and in permanent accommodation will not and do not travel into our city centre and become involved in public street injecting. It's much more likely that that's a reasonable proxy for our population of multiple and complex needs. And what that most recent survey said was there was round about 400 public drug injectors in the city. So whilst we have that relatively small number of people who are of an evening sleeping on our streets, we have a much more significant population with multiple and complex needs who are either coming in and out of rough sleeping or at significant risk. And that's why I think it's much more helpful to focus on multiple and complex needs. I do want to propose, though, that we focus on the solutions. So I know, for example, in discussions with Maggie over the years in Glasgow Homelessness Network, there's a concern from colleagues in GHN that there's a hidden population. I don't dispute that to be a distinct possibility, and that's a conversation that Maggie and I have had. It is just a plea that we focus on solutions rather than a description of the issue. In terms of some of the how we make the definition real for you, I thought it would be helpful. We did a piece of work, we're actually working on multiple and complex needs just now across the statutory and voluntary sector, and our thinking's moving to trying to stop describing the people with multiple and complex needs by our organisational structures. So what you'll quite often hear is a description of people with multiple and complex needs by the service. So we talk about people with addiction problems, we talk about people who are homeless, we talk about people with mental health problems, we talk about people in the criminal justice system. Actually, if we use the definition of multiple and complex needs, our aspiration is that we stop talking about those siloed service responses, and we talk much more about what an integrated service response is to people presenting with multiple and complex needs. The other issue that's become much clearer for us in doing this piece of work in terms of the case studies is that often resource is not the issue. So there are a number of resources that we bring into play for people with multiple and complex needs. What they do is they might avoid a crisis on a particular day. What they don't do is they don't take people out of that ongoing crisis, and they don't provide medium and longer term solutions. And interestingly, when we looked at Tomorrow's Women Glasgow, we have seen some real progress in terms of medium and longer term outcomes. So what I want to talk to you a wee bit about is what we think the difference is between our stereotypical service response and what we're doing differently in Tomorrow's Women Glasgow, to see if that gives you any kind of thought about what the solutions could be. Again, conscious of confidentiality, so because we are being filmed and we do have members of the press in the audience, this is very general in terms of the work that we've done. So we looked at complex cases in terms of what the traditional approach would be. We reviewed significantly the cases of two males and two females, age ranged from 40 to 50. And in terms of complex needs, you'll see that definition that I gave you, the UK definition, all of those people who are currently in contact with the street team and known to us as complex cases had all of the features of that definition. So they all had existing mental health issues and previous mental health service. They all had significant physical health issues, and HIV is becoming a real issue for us in that population in our city, so that's much more prevalent. And you'll know that we've had a significant HIV outbreak, which hasn't shown any signs of slowing down, particularly, if not exclusively, within the public drug injecting population. All, by definition, experienced homelessness and significant periods of rough sleeping. And again, we are really keen to think about trauma and abuse and exploitation. They had all experienced significant trauma in their lives. Criminal justice was also a factor in there, so all of those 4 individuals had been known at some point to our criminal justice services. Often the criticism of the City Council, the Health and Social Care Partnership, is that there is a lack of resource. Currently in homelessness we spend just slightly over £70 million just in homelessness. in the city, and we have 2,418 temporary and supported accommodation beds available within the city. So a significant resource, but we do struggle at the point of crisis for individuals on certain days. But when we looked at, and I pulled out two because some of the other two cases, there were characteristics that may have made them known to others, so it's just the two. And in terms of interventions and approaches, we looked over the last 3 years. One of those individuals had 8 admissions to the Drug Crisis Centre, 4 admissions into residential rehab, 4 admissions into emergency or supported accommodation within homelessness, significant support from the street team, the community homeless team, and also known to health services. So the support that we've offered that individual was not necessarily an issue about support. So for us, where that's leading us to is what the solutions are that look different. One of the female clients that we looked at had 6 attempts at residential rehab, move on twice, which is when somebody successfully managed a period of residential rehab and drug rehabilitation and is at the point of moving on. So twice that individual had got to the stage of move on. She had 9 periods of accommodation in emergency or supported accommodation, support through the street team, the complex needs team, criminal justice, the bloodborne virus nurse and the community homelessness team. So you'll see a significant resources allocated, and that just over the most recent period. These are people that have been known to us for significant periods of their lives. We then looked at the complex cases in Tomorrow's Women Glasgow, which, if you're not aware, is our multi-agency response to women involved in significant offending. So essentially it's the prison, the population who would otherwise go to Corton Vale or have spent significant periods in Corton Vale. That population also have significant periods of rough sleeping. And we've now had that service has been going for 3 years, and we're really clear that some of the lessons learned there are lessons that we can take elsewhere. So we were conscious that that complexity is very similar in Tomorrow's Women in Glasgow, but we knew it worked. So we wanted to look at what the differences were. So we looked at 4 cases there, age range from 24 to 61. And age range was important there because in that service we've potentially got access to much younger people, so we've got a much greater chance of success in terms of interrupting that trajectory of complexity. They all had mental health needs, physical health needs, substance misuse, homelessness, trauma, and they all had been in prison. Interestingly, also child protection issues were also a significant factor in that population. So these were women whose children had either been removed or were on their child protection register. In terms of the services we offered through Tomorrow's Women in Glasgow, significant focus in on trauma on that service, and that's something I'll come back to. So there was trauma and mental health work. Very practical. There was a real focus on practical issues within Tomorrow's Women in Glasgow, and we saw the impact that had. So a lot of work in financial management, significant support around about accommodation, substance misuse, and we have real positive outcomes in that all of the cases we looked at were sustaining permanent accommodation. So they weren't in temporary accommodation; they were all in permanent accommodation and all able to sustain that. Significant reductions in offending. And we looked in March, and we had somewhere in the region of 90 females working with us in Tomorrow's Women in Glasgow. And these are people who would be involved in significant offending, and we had 4 re-offences from 94 women that we were working with. So real significant interventions in terms of that reduction. Reduced substance misuse and engaging with community services. So a real sense from the women that there was a re-engagement with their community, and that they'd moved from that being part of a city centre population to being part of their own community. Very similar in terms of the second case there, in terms of that focus on emotional well-being and a focus on education and employment, and significant positive outcomes around about accommodation and reduced substance misuse. So where that led us to in terms of the messages from case reviews was the difference for us is that where we've made those really positive impacts is that it's been a concentrated one-to-one. There's not a discussion with the person with multiple and complex needs about what their need is and therefore what service response they get. Their need is defined by them and the person they talk to first responds to them. So that's quite a change in terms of how services are constructed. There was in-reach and outreach, so a really significant feature of that successful work with multiple and complex needs is going to where those people are. So yes, there is an expectation that you come into the base, but if you don't, we come and find you, and we come and find where you are, and we work with you where you are. So again, that's a real feature of why it worked, and that includes prison. So if you re-offend and you go into prison, the team will come in and bring you back out of prison, straight back into the service. So you're not excluded from the service because something's not gone right. The mental health support and psychology input were really significant for us. And our thinking around about trauma-informed work is really starting to permeate what we do with people who've got multiple and complex needs. Very simply, trauma-informed work is thinking about people who present to us as services in a very challenging way, and the question you ask is, what happened to you that brought you here to us today? So rather than focus on the behaviour and rather than focus on what's presenting in front of you, actually to think about what happens to that person. That's essentially what trauma-informed work is, and we've seen some really significant changes when you take that approach. Financial support. People with multiple and complex needs quite often want to talk first about money and their accommodation. And we want to talk to them about their substance misuse or their offending behaviour or their general behaviour. That doesn't engage them. What engages them is sorting something out for them that makes their daily experience of life much more stable than it currently is. So there's a real challenge to us as professionals about what we think is the issue and what people with lived experience are telling us. And interestingly, training, education and employment played a really significant part, and that doesn't feature enough when we talk about multiple and complex needs. There's a real sense that we don't have enough aspiration around about education, employment and training for people with multiple and complex needs, and a real sense that people who are sleeping rough in the streets and or at risk of that won't be wanting to think about education, training and employment. It's not what we found when we've let them talk to us first rather than talk at them. So lastly, thinking about what some of the solutions are. We've had a challenge, and as Councillor Hunter said at the start, we'll listen to criticism and challenge. There's a significant challenge that we need more money and more beds in homelessness to tackle rough sleeping. I need to say to you, I'm not currently convinced that is the answer for us. I think what the work we've done on multiple and complex needs tells me is that we have significant resource in the city. I am concerned and remain concerned that we can't answer that point of crisis. We still struggle with that. If we had more beds in the city centre, that might mean we don't have that presenting crisis. I'm not convinced that means that we would have a robust response to people with multiple and complex needs. So I'm aware that may be controversial and that people would have different views on that, but that's where I've got to in terms of my thinking. I think the solutions are much more around about permanent accommodation and what that looks like, and you'll hear Maggie from GHN talk about the work that we've been doing in relation to Housing First, which is an evidence-based approach which really challenges our thinking about people with multiple and complex needs. But I think it has to be part of our solution. That integrated and resilient support, so support to people who are with multiple and complex needs that doesn't define them by our service responses, that doesn't talk at them, that actually listens to what issue it is that they need sorted today to allow them to talk to us about the other things. So a solution that's led by the people who are experiencing and who have multiple and complex needs, not one that's led by service. We do have proposals, and you'll be familiar with them, round about the Safe Consumption Facility, and I think the Safe Consumption Facility is part of the solution. It's not the panacea for our city centre issues round about rough sleeping or public drug injecting, but it absolutely needs to be seen as part of the solution. A trauma-informed approach, so an approach that starts to think about what happened to people to get them to that stage in their lives, and then how that informs what our services are. And hopefully what you'll hear today is a demonstration of the work that we have. So we've been engaged in those discussions for at least the last 2 years with our range of partners. So you will hear from partners in the Simon community about our CAN initiative and the work that has been done there, that has been third sector led. You'll hear about the multi-agency hub that's come out of that thinking. You'll hear about the Housing First from GHN. So I'm quite clear that we've got some of the solutions in the room, and I'm really keen to listen to people's views on those solutions and what else we might need to add in to that mix. So hopefully that's given you a sense of where we are as a partnership in terms of what we think the multiple and complex needs agenda is about, and our thinking on what some of the solutions might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I know there was a lot to take in there and a lot to think about. But I'm going to ask now Billy Mitchell from the City Mission to come up and make his presentation to us.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For most people who know me, 10 minutes is a struggle for me to talk, as in it would usually be maybe an hour or so. But firstly, thank you for the invitation to speak here this morning at a very important sort of part and a very important sort of factor in my own life with regard to kind of housing and homelessness. Basically, I'm a volunteer with Glasgow City Mission. The Chief Executive, Grant Campbell, he can't be here this morning, he's on holiday, well-earned rest for Grant, so he asked me to come up and speak here. For 6 months of the last 2 years, I've actually been the night shelter manager. And the night shelter manager's job basically ran from September right through until maybe the end of April, beginning of May. And that was my kind of role as a night shelter manager. A very kind of blessed role, a very important role, but one I just felt quite humble to be part of as well. So I'll go through hopefully a wee sample of what the Glasgow City Mission has undergone over the last 7 years that the night shelter has ran, and hopefully give you an idea of, and linking in with what already Suzanne said and what the rest of the speakers will say as well, and how we move forward in trying to eradicate homelessness and give people, the individuals, that better chance of life. My first slide here this morning is really just a wee snapshot of what the night shelter is about. We are a 4-month emergency service. Last year we ran from the 1st of December through to the 31st of March. We deliver with a growing number of partnerships, which I'll maybe focus on as we go through. We have a small staff of 3 permanent staff members employed by Glasgow City Mission and 2 regular volunteers. People will give up 1 night per week, Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is. They come in every Monday night, every Tuesday night, every Wednesday night. And then an army of church volunteers. We have 28 churches involved last year, and they supplied 2 or 3 people per evening who weren't trained, but they were the people who served tea and toast and simply just engaged with the people. They were the first smiling face they possibly saw. Last year, we had over 602 individuals use the service, and we were accessed 3,561 times. We use what's called an open door policy. We do not ask, the people where they come from, why they're there. They have approached the winter night shelter because technically that night they're homeless. And the wide range of people who we do have using the night shelter, from people who have chaotic lifestyles, who have chaotic needs, to people, believe it or not, we had a couple this year from New Zealand who were backpacking and had run out of money. And the police had brought them along and dropped them off. So you can imagine the impression the night shelter made on them. Okay. We also had a young man from Ireland who came over to Glasgow to meet his internet girlfriend, and she didn't want anything to do with him. And the police brought him to the Glasgow Winter Night Shelter, and he had an eye-opening evening, 2 evenings there, before he would return back home to Ireland with his ticket. What we do is when the guys and girls come in the door is we take what we call a fire register. So we have their names, we ask their dates of birth, and that's really all we ask of them. It's really just genuinely to be a fire register. We also have engaged in monitoring through GHN, and Maggie will maybe mention more of that later, But GHN were very supportive in giving us a monitoring forum, which we then asked the guys and girls again, while we were sitting down in tea and toast, if we could fill this in. And it gave us a real good idea of where the people came from, why they're there that particular night, and the various reasons for homelessness, whether it's one night or whatever. We have obviously our partnership, as we mentioned, and the partnerships that we've grown over the last few years include obviously NHS and Hunter Street, the Simon Community RSVP team in particular, Govan Law Centre. We also have the Marie Trust, the Wayside Club, and Lodging House Mission, where is the building we actually use for the Glasgow Winter Night Shelter. They're the main, I would say, active people who partner us. There's others most probably forgotten directly. Hamish Allen Centre came on board 2 years ago strongly and initially opened up a drop-in at the NHS Hunter Street. And that was a very important link because it's literally 400 yards round the corner from Lodging House Mission, if you know the location at all, just across the road from the Barrowland Dancing. So we would go round, it's not been called dancing for a while, I'm sure, a gig. So we lived round the corner in East Campbell Street. Hunter Street is just round the corner. So Hamish Allen, along with NHS services, were there, opened in the morning, and would see our guys and girls from the night shelter, and a very important sort of link in that first year. Last year it changed. We actually had the Hamish Allen staff on site, and that made quite a difference to us, which I'll maybe come back to as well. Our partnerships are a mixture of voluntary, commissioned services, council agencies that I've mentioned. And what we're really trying to do is look at the guys and girls as individuals and then deal with their needs directly. And as a charity, we have been challenged in doing that. We only can do so much. But over the years that we have been running, we've been finding that more people are interested in what we do and how they can help. So they're coming to us as much as we're going to them to ask and contribute to that. I mentioned the additional services from Hamish Allen last year were really a dramatic change. Now, there was suspicion from the men and women who use the services. They didn't want to speak to the Hack or Hamish Allen Centre people because they've been told so often, there's nothing for you, there's nothing for you, there's nothing for you. But having the two guys within the night shelter and physically being there at the door, and they were dressed the same as our guys with fluorescent yellow jackets on, saying, you know, Glasgow City Mission, night shelter staff. They were there with these on the engagement that they then saw, and because they knew a lot of these men and women personally, they could actually tell us that so-and-so had accommodation, and we actually arranged with the Hamish Allen Centre to send them back to that accommodation if that was possible at that time of night. So it worked, and it worked well for us. And it also gave us a link first thing in the morning. Again, many of the men and women were quite exasperated at the fact that each day they would appear at one of the various housing offices to see a caseworker to be told, we've nothing for you, go back to Hamish Allen. But the Hamish Allen staff who were on site, they were actually being more direct in making appointments for the men and women to go and see people and see something more active happening. And we had quite a bit of success, I would suspect, in that. I've maybe missed a wee part out here just to give you a brief history of the night shelter. 7 years ago, Glasgow City Mission recognised that there was a real need. We had a really terrible winter 7 years ago, and my boss at that time, Andrew Lowe, who was the previous chief executive, decided we need to do something quickly. And over a period of 2 weeks, we opened up our old huts, the shieling. If you know the Glasgow City Mission at all, 2 wooden huts around the McAlpine Street, and we simply opened them back up again. We moved into a new shiny building in Brown Street at Crimea Street. I'd encourage you to visit. We moved into a new shiny building there, but we still owned the huts technically. So we moved 20 odd people with our capacity at that time, and they came and slept on the floor. There was no really any other engagement apart from that. The great thing is that the RSVP team, Simon Community, started coming in and taking notes and trying to link in with the guys and girls. That was the first true partnership that we saw. We were there for for 3 years, then we moved up to Enfield St Stephen Church, and we added more services, and we added our capacity, we went up to 40 people. So we went up to 40 people. 2 years ago, we relocated again to the Lodging House Mission in East Campbell Street. That gave us a tremendous joining up process where the men and women in the morning, well then, they didn't have to leave our premises, Lodging House Mission premises, they could stay on for breakfast 5 days a week. So not only were they given a bed for the night and a cup of tea and toast and somewhere secure and warm to stay, they actually could stay on if they wished and have breakfast, courtesy of Lodging House Mission and one of our kind of sister charities. So they did that, but also gave us an opportunity to really engage then with the men and women who were still there. So the Marie Trust, Lodging House Mission staff, Glasgow City Mission staff, the Govan Law Centre in 2 mornings a week were physically there. They were physically there, and they would go in and sit and speak to the guys and girls and make sure that they could engage with the appropriate service. Sometimes that service would take them round to Hunter Street to get something seen, health, bad feet, was a common problem. Obviously, there may be drug addictions in relation or medication issues that they didn't have. They could be taken round to the NHS Hunter Street. We could also then deal right away with their housing issues as well. Not deal with them completely, but at least get them going in the right direction. So that joined up process. The 3 charities, Marie Trust, City Mission, Lodging House Mission, we have clothing, we have showers, we have other food. We also have day activities that we try to encourage the men and women to come to these various locations. So that was an introduction to Lodging House Mission. Lodging House Mission, in response to the 5 days breakfast, then opened on a Saturday, and that gave a great kind of opening for the men and women to also be there on a Saturday morning. They weren't turned out onto the street. Sadly, on a Sunday morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, my team would open the doors and have to put 40 people out, 29 people out, whatever, on a Sunday morning for them to go and find somewhere else to go. So that's something maybe we could look at. It's something, maybe a target that we would look at in next year's night shelter. A number of kind of stats. I know people do like kind of figures and bits and pieces, but last year, we reached capacity on only 32 occasions. On only kind of 9 occasions, I think it is. But the capacity, it meant that we didn't have to turn anyone away. The year before, it was 32 occasions we had to turn people away. And one night we had 56 people came to our door. So that was 16 people who were offered tea, coffee and a sleeping bag and sent back out. Why that particular night? It was raining, it was cold, and they wanted somewhere to sleep. So we don't ask, with that open door approach. We had one guest this year who remained for 102 evenings, 102 nights. Right? So he wasn't an Indigenous Glaswegian. He was an asylum seeker who didn't have anywhere to go. He'd slept in various couches and friends, but he came and he felt safe, and he was catered for during that 102 days. Sadly, where that gentleman is now, I can't tell you. And that's most probably something which I would suggest in task, look at a task force, that we need to maybe do more follow through. We need to find out where people go. We need to find out where they are now, because we have not the resources to do that at this moment in time. 518 guests remained less than 10 nights, and there's quite a large number of people who were only here for one night, and that was because of the partnership with Hamish Allen, with the other agencies that found accommodation for these men and women, which is good. Just to kind of wrap that up then, what we're looking for in our new session 2017-2018, there must be additional services added to it. Last year, we felt, and my staff felt, and volunteers felt, they were trialled and they felt kind of concerned about mental health issues. We had a number of people where one of my team had to physically sit all night and physically sit with them and just be with them because they were so agitated, they had no medication, whatever, and they couldn't sleep. We had people who had learning difficulties, and the police had brought them to us because it wasn't appropriate that they would stay in a police office. We had men and women who actually were discharged for whatever reason from the NHS, from the A&E up at Glasgow City Centre, and were sent down in a taxi to ourselves here. So we bore, to a degree, the brunt of that. Almost every night we would have someone who had mental health issues and caused, to a degree, a challenge. Sometimes that was aggressive behaviour, but again, we cope with that. My staff are trained, the volunteers are trained, so at least they knew and understood what was happening. So that's most probably something, if we were looking for an add-on, that the Hamish Allen team being on site at 10 o'clock at night when we open the doors, it would be great if we had some form of medical triage there as well. We put plasters on people's heads because they didn't want to go to the hospital. We bandaged up their feet, we bandaged their knees, we administered first aid. We phoned the ambulance on 15 different occasions for people who had passed out to such an extent. We used naloxone at least on 5 different occasions, to revive people. So we are lifesavers. That's not a boast, or something to be proud of. We're lifesavers for these men and women. And the mental health issues have caused us issues to a degree. So my plea would be, if we were to add on, to have some form of medical triage there at the night shelter. The night shelter is an emergency night shelter. It's only there for 4 months. We don't want really to extend it to 5 months or 6 months or whatever, because that in itself is not an answer. That is not a route. Again, we've heard already some of the outcomes that we're looking for, that people do have success when they're fitted into full-time permanent accommodation. And whether they go off the rails, whether they end up in prison, whether they go and leave that accommodation for a couple of days, they can come back to it. They should be able to come back to it each time. We're looking at, and we're hoping to add the services to this new city centre hub that some people may have heard of. Grant Campbell is a great mover for that, a great believer in that. That what we find happening at night and the information that we can supply to the guys and girls who come along to the night shelter, if we can do that maybe a bit earlier in the evening, from 9 o'clock in the evening through to 1 o'clock in the morning, we're not promising them a bed. At 1 o'clock in the morning we will start to maybe shut the doors, and this is only an idea at the moment, but between 9 and 1 seems to be a time when the bulk of people who are homeless are beginning to look. Unfortunately, people who are living chaotic lifestyles, they don't come along during office hours. They don't sharp your door at 2:30 in the afternoon or 10:30 in the morning, but they will come along at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Our city centre hub, our vision would be that all the services would be there. A welcoming face would bring them in, open door approach, welcoming face would bring them in. We'd do that form of sort of triage at the door, and then send them to the people in the same building to say, listen, let's go and get your health, let's get your feet checked out, let's get something, your head wound sorted. Or if it's someone saying, listen, my benefits were stopped today, then we'll have a benefits person there to say, listen, allow us to see where you are in the system. We're not giving them, a handout there and then. We're not giving them a complete and comprehensive answer, but we're listening. We're listening and we're sharing. So a city centre hub with the add-on of charities, of commission services, of the local government agencies and central government agencies being there and being able to listen to these people. I believe that the benefits there in listening to these guys and girls, you will reap the benefit. Some will go back and maybe sleep on someone else's couch because they've settled them down for the night. Some people will still need emergency accommodation, and it's got to be appropriate emergency accommodation, not just parked somewhere and forgotten about. That shouldn't really happen. The follow-through, as I say, that we're most probably embarrassed at times that when we see 29 or 30 odd people, when we have my team leave in the morning and we pass on to the day shift teams, some of these people just disappear. And some people will, tragically find themselves dead within the next 12 hours because of a drug overdose that will do it somewhere. Some people will not find the medical help, and that will bring about a tragic and early death. Other people, it's really a home they require. They're looking for somebody to listen. And if we can supply that in a new city centre hub, And I think that's the right direction for us as one of the sort of important Glasgow City Centre charities. We can do that. I do believe that the task force might have something to offer because of this new local government, itself being here. But there's a lot of tremendous work which we'll hear. We'll hear of CAN project. We'll hear the CAN project more, building on what Suzanne's already said. And that, embracing an individual, taking a person, listening to them, and it might be nursemaiding them. It might be watching their every move and making sure they go to an appointment, and make sure that they're almost up in the morning. It might be like that for a while, but less and less, these guys and girls need someone to trust in. What we've found is that some people don't have trust in maybe Hamish Allen. They don't have trust in NHS. They don't have trust in this person or that person. But it's someone with maybe one of the charities that I work with, Lodging House Mission, Marie Trust, City Mission, that they actually do start to trust. So what's wrong with a city centre agency or a housing agency being with, Glasgow City Mission, Lodging House Mission, or, the Marie Trust, and being with them and actually sitting with someone they trust and then building up the trust and rebuilding that person's lives. Glasgow Winter Night Shelter has been an important part of my life for the last 2 years. An amazing job. As I say, I'm back to being a volunteer, which I love. So tonight I'll be at Glasgow City Centre, the drop-in centre down at Brown Street. If you fancy a rolling sausage and some soup, homemade soup, come along and see some of the men and women who I'll be sharing with there. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Billy. We are overrunning a bit here, you might have noticed, but I think it's really important that we hear this stuff, so I'm not going to ask people to curtail their presentations, and we'll just need to overrun if that's okay with you. So we're now going to hear from Lorna Walker, who's been down at the helping out. Okay, so come up and give us your presentation.
Thank you, Billy, and certainly we at Govan Law Centre echo everything you say. Thank you for having us here to speak this morning and to present certainly Govan Law Centre's viewpoint. I've had the privilege of being involved in the Winter Night Shelter partnership for the past 2 years. I was originally taken on by Govan Law Centre as a senior solicitor for the prevention of homeless outreach hubs at the Marie Trust, Glasgow City Mission and Lodging House Mission. Therefore, we'd already established a good working relationship with the homeless day centres. However, I would like to think that being part of the Winter Night Shelter, our relationships have gone from strength to strength, and it's certainly allowed us at Govan Law Centre to do our job even better. Our involvement with the Winter Night Shelter was every Tuesday and Thursday morning from 8 AM onwards, normally until about 11 or 12, depending how busy we were that day. We would spend a total of 119 hours on site at the Winter Night Shelter, and we dedicated more than 300 hours to client casework. Our stats confirm we saw 258 service users at the shelter. Our priority was always to make sure the service users were accommodated, and we would work closely with them to ensure this was the result. Out of the 258 people we saw, 197 of them were accommodated. I would say the other 61 service users, mainly EU nationals or refugees, we were able to offer them advice and assistance, and for whatever reason that they were not eligible for accommodation, we would offer them legal advice in relation to private tenancy rights, advice and benefits applications and entitlement, and ensuring that they were getting the right support from mental health and other complex needs services. This included signposting them to appropriate agencies, for example, the Refugee Survival Trust. In relation to partnership working, Having the street team in the winter night shelter was a great advantage for us. It really was a huge comfort for us, me in particular, when I would meet with a client, whether it was at an outreach hub or in our office, and they would tell us that they have been sleeping on the streets and potentially facing more nights in the streets. And we would phone the street team on their free phone number and ask them to meet our client anywhere in Glasgow, and they will accompany them to make a homeless presentation. Many of our clients do not have a phone, and the street team would always contact us later, whether it was a text message or a phone call, to advise us of the outcome. This would allow us to act swiftly and get an urgent appointment with the client the next day to do a follow-up appointment and to ensure that we could fulfil the legal process. The street team certainly always go that extra mile. They would take the person to the City Mission, Marie Trust, Lodging House Mission, and they would ensure that this follow-up with a solicitor would allow us to fulfil our duty of care and to make sure the person was accommodated. The winter night shelter has worked so well the past 2 years, but personally I saw an even bigger improvement this year. Certainly Billy touched on having the caseworkers on site was a huge advantage, and Govan Law Centre did not have to proceed to lodging a petition in the Court of Session this year, as in last year we did. We certainly still had to send our magic letter, that the clients call it, to sometimes ensure that we had to remind the council of their duty. As we're all aware, the people that have used the winter night shelter have no alternative and normally have a multitude of complex needs, from leaving abusive relationships to profound mental and physical health difficulties to addiction issues, often with suicide intent. And it is important for Govan Law Centre to know that we are ensuring their legal rights are met urgently, as well as ensuring that they're getting help with medical issues, whether this is contact with the HIV nurse, an appointment with a GP at Hunter Street, referred to the complex needs team at the Simon community, assistance with benefits, a hot meal at the Marie Trust, City Mission, Lodging House Mission, where they were offered additional emotional support, and from the caring volunteers and workers that were always there to listen and lend a hand. Certainly this unique partnership, which was strengthened at the winter night shelter, we believe should be available all year round by establishing, as Billy said, a centralised hub in the city centre, offering a multi-agency, holistic approach, ensuring that people's legal rights are met for prevention of homelessness assistance, and also regarding their benefits, and make sure there's care for their all-round well-being. Unfortunately, there seems to be recurrent problems. It is clear to us that the same problems emerge time and time again. In my personal experience, and the clients that I have met that particularly face rough sleeping, firstly, Glasgow City Council sometimes do fail to take a homeless application. It can be the case that no homeless application is taken when someone presents to the casework team. Instead, they're offered housing options by the caseworker, and the caseworker will make a decision regarding a person's homelessness application without taking a full application. This is problematic, as a full investigation of the person's circumstances must be taken, and it often, not by investigating the person's full circumstances, can often impact on the council's decision, often resulting in no offer of temporary accommodation. I have met many individuals who have experienced this response by the council, and more often than not, once they meet with a solicitor, we can ensure that a homeless application is taken. However, we do have concerns about the many people who do not have legal representation and are already vulnerable and have no confidence or support to challenge this. If a person presents to the council demonstrating homelessness or a threat of homelessness, and the council don't take a homeless application, this is a clear breach of statutory duty. It also prevents a person have the right of review, as no homeless decision is given in writing. We believe this could result in misrepresentation of homelessness stats, as we do not believe that everyone that approaches Glasgow City Council for homelessness assistance is being recorded. Instead, they could be perhaps offered housing options. We do believe that this conceals the harsh reality and volume of homelessness, rough sleeping and inappropriate housing in Glasgow. Secondly, Glasgow City Council do take homeless applications, but they do not fulfil their statutory duty by offering temporary accommodation whilst a full investigation is undertaken. Sometimes a homeless application is taken, but for various reasons, no accommodation is offered to that person. This could be perhaps due to the fact that there's no up-to-date risk assessment, mental health difficulties, the risks are deemed too high, or there's simply not enough accommodation for the men, women, or children or families. Whatever the reasons, this is not acceptable. This is a clear breach of statutory duty, and this puts an already vulnerable person at a risk of harm and not seeking further assistance in the future, and they lose confidence in the system that is designed to help them, resulting in people continuing to reside in unsuitable accommodation, staying in abusive relationships, and also leading to street homelessness if they've perhaps lost faith that anybody will help them. Sadly, we have experienced this to be a particularly common hurdle for many of our clients, and often the council and the caseworkers accept that they cannot discharge their duty by accommodating the people. I do certainly believe that working together as a multi-agency allows us to stay in close contact with this individual and to enable them so we can contact them for their legal rights to be exercised. And it's sometimes, unfortunately, we've had to proceed to judicial review in the Court of Session because of this. We do believe that the lack of temporary accommodation is also related to the caseworkers not moving people on from hostel accommodation or the temporary furnished flat. Once someone has been accommodated in a temporary accommodation, the casework team has 28 days to make a decision regarding their homeless status. Sometimes they ask for it to be longer, but generally 28 days. If Glasgow City Council accept duty, they should allocate an individual caseworker and make Section 5 referrals to housing associations in areas to the person that have indicated that they would stay in Glasgow. However, this can often take months, sometimes years. This lack of structure and engagement with people can lead to them being forgotten in hostile environments. We've heard the phrase a lot recently that people are not tenancy ready and often have to prove themselves before they're offered independent living. And no Section 5 referrals are made until they do prove themselves. It is clear when this became, it's unclear actually when this became the council's policy, but this can be dangerous as people are often forgotten about, as I've said, in the hostile environment, and a lack of support can cause them a downward spiral. Thirdly, Glasgow City Council does not often offer temporary accommodations to people that are referred back to other councils. It is on numerous occasions some of our clients are referred back to other councils, and Glasgow City Council consider that they have a connection to that council, but during this time Glasgow City Council do have a duty to accommodate them until they transfer back to another council, and this rarely occurs. Fourthly, and quite simply, people are not always aware of what their legal rights are. There are certainly a number of people who simply do not know what their legal rights are. Perhaps they've separated from a partner or found themselves in an unknown situation and literally have nowhere to go. Perhaps they're a refugee that came to the UK and there's been a breakdown in a relationship. When we are able to contact these people, we can advise them what their legal rights are and who to present to. Our concerns. We're extremely concerned about the people that we have not been able to reach, and certainly as solicitors and caseworkers, we've experienced our own challenges with the council, and this has given us insight into how much worse the situation could be for people who are not supported and give up at the first hurdle and could end up rough sleeping. We as an organisation have had the great opportunity and privilege to work in partnership with Glasgow City Mission, Marie Trust, Lodging House Mission, Simon Community, RSVP Street Team, while being involved in the winter night shelter. And this has improved an invaluable partnership over the winter night months, which has delivered excellent results. The winter night shelter allowed us the opportunity to meet and assist extremely vulnerable people, making sure they are accommodated and their legal needs met, while also offering a holistic approach. We are in no doubt these vulnerable people would perhaps not have the confidence to approach us at a solicitor's office, and we believe that this service should be available all year round. I feel it's also important for me to mention mental health and homelessness. There is certainly a clear connection with homelessness and mental health. It is Govan Law Centre's strong belief that in order to address rough sleeping, mental health services must be improved. Many of the people we meet who sleep rough often tell us that they've been let down by mental health services. Therefore, we would suggest the following. Firstly, have a better referral system for homeless people dealing with mental health issues and follow-up support for each person. Secondly, each homelessness caseworker who is concerned regarding a person with mental health must record this and make the referral to mental health services. Thirdly, all rough sleepers should be given a full mental health assessment and support to enable them to be accommodated and support to maintain their tenancy once they are accommodated. Fourthly, people with drug and alcohol addictions should also be offered mental health support. I have had many clients that were told it was a behavioural issue by mental health professionals, as perhaps they're self-medicating and they would need to come off the drugs or alcohol before they get mental health assistance. Lastly, we would suggest that private homelessness hotels like the Belgrove should be closed. They should not exploit vulnerable people. I have actually got a number of case studies, but I'm aware of the time. So perhaps if anyone wants to talk about, ask me them at the end, or if anybody wants to email me about them, I can send case studies at the end. Govan Law Centre, as solutions, would suggest, firstly, as we've already mentioned, Glasgow City Council should record all stats for anyone making a homeless presentation. Secondly, we would say that caseworker training is paramount. It's our experience that some caseworkers are more empathetic than others, and this can influence whether a homeless application is taken. Sadly, it is our experience that some of the caseworkers do display a prejudicial attitude and sometimes a lack of compassion. And this also leads to my third point, that caseworkers' inconsistency must be addressed to provide a more equal service for people that do present as homeless. For example, some caseworkers will take a homeless application while others will only offer housing options. Sometimes they do tell people to come back day after day until accommodation is available, and this can be very demoralising. Fourthly, everyone that should be entitled to make a homeless application without necessary barriers or hurdles. This is a statutory right. Caseworkers should not just offer housing options without assessing the person's need fully. This should not be a snap decision without a detailed investigation as per the statutory provisions. We would suggest that Glasgow needs a fully resourced, independent, multi-agency city centre hub to expand and extend services to people to people affected by homelessness and rough sleeping. We believe this should be based on the winter night shelter model available all year round with the partnerships. We do believe that Scotland's homelessness legislation is supportive and innovative in terms of the aim to eradicate homelessness. And we believe if we have access to everyone that is affected by homelessness, we could prevent rough sleeping. We believe there's a clear duty incumbent upon Glasgow City Council in terms of homelessness and accommodation, as we do not believe that anyone should sleep rough in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. I said that we were going to listen to some critical voices, and as you hear, I wasn't kidding about that. So next, I'm going to ask Lorraine from the Simon community to come up and talk us through the CAN initiative.
Good morning, everybody. Really delighted to be representing the partnership here today, and some of the key members of the steering group are in the audience as well, so they might want to pitch in at some point. I'm also really pleased that the City Government has taken this leadership role so early in its new administration to be tackling what is a really important issue. So, sorry, you're going to move on for me. So, I'm here today to talk about the CAN. I'm Chief Exec of Glasgow, Simon Community Scotland. I find myself for that, for referring back to our old name. I'm also Chief Exec of Streetwork, who are an organisation in Edinburgh who tackle rough sleeping in Edinburgh as well. But I'm here today to talk on behalf of the CAN, which is a multi-agency approach that was developed 2 years ago as a third sector-led initiative. And I'm going to talk to you about what it is, what it's for, why it's needed, how it operates, what makes it work. So who's involved in the CAN sorry, my pages have run. It's okay, I've got it. So what is the CAN? The CAN is a multi-agency approach. It's a collaborative approach. It's about doing better with what we have. It's not about having more. It's not about looking at more resources or the need for more accommodation. It's about the fact that on the ground we have a number of very committed, very expert, very skilled services, teams and leaders on the ground. So the CAN was about bringing that together, harnessing that for the people in crisis in Glasgow and sharing the learning and sharing the understanding. It wasn't about new resource, it was about doing better with what we had. Who's it for? Well, it's those people that we're here to talk about today, those people that we all see on the streets, and they're there not because the individual solutions that each of these very committed organisations have tried to deliver for them over years aren't the right ones, but because they just aren't able to engage with those solutions, they aren't able to match up with that. They're often excluded, and on the basis of how they present, on the basis of the decisions that they appear to make for themselves, but their frame of reference of life and the choices that they make have been formed through trauma, exclusion, harm, that puts them in a place where most often they can't think beyond the next hour, never mind the next day. Billy talked about people not presenting during the day for thinking about where they're going to be that night. It's only at that point when it comes to night time that they kind of think, right, okay, I'm facing another night, what do I do now? Because their frame of reference doesn't match up to anything that most of us would recognise in terms of planning and decision making and thinking through consequences of behaviours. And that leads to them bumping up against services in the most difficult ways that we find really challenging. We find it really challenging to respond to that and really challenging to work with that because our frames of reference are based on our systems, our approaches and our experience of life. Why is it needed? Is it because we have a population in Glasgow that whilst we're getting really good at resolving new rough sleepers, people who present, the average is 1 or 2 nights, no more, because we're really good at resolving those numbers now, but we still have a population in Glasgow that 25 to 30 are visible on the streets every night. There are probably somewhere between 55 and 70 identified individuals through the CAN that are entrenched. They are chronically homeless. They are chronically chaotic. They are chronically suffering from trauma, harm, mental health problems, and issues that have been long-standing within their lives. There are no simple solutions for these individuals. Most of them reflect the case studies that Suzanne put up at the start of the day. They've had many experiences of accommodation. They've had many experiences of different types of support across the city. That hasn't worked with any sustainable solution for those individuals. So we need to come together in the team approach to actually address that and bring all of the slices of the cake together to make a whole picture. Each one of us thought we knew these individuals really well. What we found is when we brought the organisations together, we only knew one part of the picture relating to them. So when you bring the whole picture together, you get a different response. How does it operate? Well, we have a key worker group, and that's where the magic happens, right at the front line, because that's where the skill, the knowledge, the expertise, the understanding, and the actual engagement and perception of that individual and what matters to them, what the background around that individual is. That intelligence is absolutely vital. Really knowing that person, not just in how they're presenting that day, but what the back history to that individual is, what the challenges that they've been through in the past, why it is that they see no hope now because they've had so many failed attempts and so many exclusions and harm and just told to go away. Really understanding that and then having the intelligence, the skill, the training, the experience to work with that is what makes it work. And that's what happens at the key worker group. They enter that room without boundaries. They enter that room where they leave their professional, their agency, their service specification, their contract, their funding boundaries at the door. There's no power within that room. That's entirely about how do we come together to work in the interests of this individual. And whoever the person is that has the greatest trust with that individual is the person that's empowered to work with them. They become the key worker. And the whole group that works around them then empowers that trust. And that is what makes it work, is that engendered support around trust and engagement and high degree of flexibility, never giving up, working consistently to address any barriers or thresholds that that person bumps up against, working with all the agencies around us to actually tackle misperceptions about that individual or past histories, past experience, that quite often are negative because these are not easy people. They're really challenging in terms of how they live their lives and their frame of reference and how that applies to how they operate on a daily basis. The key worker group then talks to the operations group, and they're the resource managers, and that allows us to then decide how to shift and change resources across the partnership. And that then feeds into the steering group, and that's where the system change happens. So what it comes from the front line right up, based on learning from individual service users, right up to the strategic group, where the next bit of magic happens, because we are empowered to actually make system change within our own organisations on the basis of the learning from working with those individuals at the key worker level. Who's involved? Glasgow HSCP and Glasgow City Mission, who are a day centre organisation. You heard from Billy, who run the winter night shelter. The Marie Trust, Sandy's here today, who also run a complex need intervention service and a buildings-based approach. Ourselves, Turning Point Scotland have just joined us as an expansion of the strategic partnership. And the much needed, many and varied, and that's about the wider engagement, because around each individual service user, there's a whole range of other people that need to be involved and to be connected with and drawn in so that we can get solutions for those individuals. We're being supported by the Robertson Trust. The only extra resource that has delivered for the CAN is a very highly skilled and expert facilitator who sits in centre to coordinate the partnership and make sure that we're working as effectively together as we possibly can be, and we're identifying constantly what new resources we need. And we're now being supported by the Oak Foundation to move forward over the next 3 years to scale the CAN up. I'm rattling through this because I'm very aware of time as well. In terms of impact, again, like Suzanne, I'm very aware that I don't want to make anybody identifiable here, so we'll call this guy Peter. He's in his early 30s, and when the CAN first engaged with him, he had been rough sleeping for around about 7 years. He had no contact, no formal contact with services. He'd been rough sleeping for 7 years. That red line that you see on the chart there is his rough sleeping history. It's taken an awful lot of work and a long time to get him very intensive support, very intensive negotiation with all the agencies that can offer solutions for him to get him to a place where he's relatively stable within emergency accommodation. He's a good example of someone who doesn't cope well with emergency accommodation. He's been in them all. There probably isn't a service in Glasgow that he's not engaged with at some point. He has been in them all since we started working with him. He doesn't cope well with emergency accommodation, but we're managing to keep him stable. He has had one return to rough sleeping simply because of that difficulty coping with emergency accommodation. He wants a tenancy, he wants settled housing, and he's a good example of why rapid access to housing is really important. But for now, he's stable and safe. We'll call Joe, man in his 40s, with a really, really long history of chaos, a long history of physical harm, came to us with chronic health problems, notorious in the city, were I to use his real name. He is someone who would have been seen as hopeless and beyond help by many. But Joe worked with us. It's not been easy. And he has moved on to his own tenancy, that purple line. After all of that chaos that has gone before, that purple section is 6 months of settled living. Not easy settled living, a lot of challenge and a lot of difficulty. He hasn't been the greatest neighbour. He hasn't been the greatest tenant. But he's been working with the Housing First team with Turning Point Scotland and ourselves within the CAN initiative, and it has been moving on, and he's maintained 6 months of settled living. Sadly, we lost Joe on Monday, and we lost Joe to chronic health problems that had been developed long before we started working with him in the CAN, that were exacerbated by his homelessness, not caused by homelessness, but exacerbated by it. But I suppose the one thing that we will take from that within the CAN is that he had 6 months of having his own house. And I know that very recently he just said, in terms of the problems some of the problems he's been having in the house is, I've waited 15 years for this, I'm not going to give it up easy. I'm going to do what it takes to keep it. So he's waited 15 years, he's had 6 months of having his own home, but sadly we've lost him now. But he is a great example of what can and will be achieved through the CAN initiative for that kind of multi-agency working. Lastly, this is one of the younger women that we've worked with. She's in her mid-20s. And again, very chaotic background, over 10 years, first problems in her mid-teens, and lots and lots of offending history and prison sentences. What we're looking at there is a long-term settled opportunity. She's in a TFF. We're now looking to move her on to her own tenancy. She's actually making an application for her own tenancy. The change in her presentation, the change in her attitude, the change in her expectation of her future is absolutely remarkable. She's talking about a different future. She's talking about college and training. It's just something that was an aspiration she has never had at any point in her life up to now. And it is that trust, engagement and empowerment and giving her the control over her life through the CAN initiative and making sure that the support network is there that has opened up that opportunity for her to be the person, or to start to think to be the person that she possibly can be, rather than the offender, the addict, the troublemaker, the problem. She now is someone that has a hope and a future. In terms of What next for the CAN? It's about scaling up. As I said, the Oak Foundation have very kindly supported us to look to a 3-year future and to scale the initiative up. And that's firstly about reaching more people. We've identified 55 to 70 people within the city that meet the criteria of just chronic homelessness, chronic chaos. So the whole initiative over the next 3 years is how do we reach and deliver the same similar solutions for them that we have for those 3 case studies that I've just talked about. We've already started working with 9 more people in the last couple of months, and 4 of them have resolved their rough sleeping. They've moved into accommodation, which again demonstrates that empowering that front line is what delivers change for service users. There are some more resources. We will have additional coordination staff that will allow us to reach more people and have more engagement with the teams. We are looking at a rapid housing access arrangement based on the principles of housing first and how we can scale that up for the individuals involved in the CAN and make sure that a move to settled living is as fast as it possibly can be, regardless of the complexity of need. There is increased facilitation within the steering group and within the capacity of the coordinators. Importantly as well, we are formalising that evaluation and learning, and the Oak are funding us to work with an academic institution to make sure that we're capturing what is it about the CAN approach that actually delivers, and how can we share that learning with other people. We are looking to just embed the culture of the CAN so that it becomes the normal service response. It's not something that's unique or different, it's just how Glasgow works. It's how Glasgow responds to the vulnerable and the needy and people with complex needs. It's not special, or it's not held just for the 70 top scorers in an assessment tool. And you've heard a little bit about the multi-agency hub already. We have modelled an approach to develop a CAN approach within a building effectively, where all the partners are there on a make it easy agenda. We need to make it easy for people to access the support and help. And systemically right now, we actually make it really quite hard for the most vulnerable at the worst points in their lives to reach the services that need, to get that mental health assessment, to make an easy application for accommodation, to just have a chat about what's going on for them that day. That's what we need to do, and that's what the agenda around the multi-agency hub is. Be a single point of access for those with the most complex needs. Everything that they may need will be available through that building, and it will be quick, it will be easy, and it will be straightforward and available, and it will work on a multi-agency coordinated approach in the same way as the virtual CAN has, but within a building. In terms of the challenges that we face in delivering that, both in terms of scaling up the CAN and what comes next, there is that whole agenda around culture and approach. This is different. We have been driven into our silos systematically over many years. We've been, as a voluntary sector, we've been driven into competition by the process of procurement and commissioning and contract management. I know that there is an agenda in Glasgow to change that I really welcome and endorse in terms of an alliance and approach for future commissioning for homelessness. But that's the culture that we're working in just now. So actually opening that up and opening up the trust within the organisations to share and learn and offer up their resources is a change to culture and approach, and that's a big challenge for us. Data management in terms of information sharing and the challenges around data protection, or the perceived challenges more often than the real challenges around data protection, are also a big challenge, and who owns the information around an individual. But we know that when those information is properly shared and service users understand how it's being shared, it's really empowering for them, and it's really empowering for the frontline staff. As I said earlier, this is not about new resources, it's about making better use of existing resources, but that does bring with it a capacity management issue, both within the voluntary sector and the statutory sector, because what we're doing is drawing in from existing services the skill and expertise of the staff there. What this service needs, this response needs, is a highly flexible response. So you can't just say, give me 2 hours on a Wednesday and we'll be able to fix this for this individual. This is a here and now response. You have to be able, whether it's 2 hours, 10 hours, or every day for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. That's the level of flexibility we need to be able to draw in from the resources that are available to us within the city. And that does create challenge. And it particularly creates challenge, I think, for the statutory sector more than the voluntary sector, and that's been our experience to date. We want to go further with it. We've been working with a very focused cohort of homelessness organisations. But the problems that we are dealing with in terms of finding solutions for individuals and the complexity of their need mean that we need many more organisations involved. And I'd love to see us develop that engagement around hope and expectation around employability and learning for the future, even for those that are coming through the can doorway from the earliest point. Because I think when we start having those conversations, I know that when we start having those conversations with people who have been seen as hopeless and have felt hopeless and have felt that hopelessness from the services that respond, if you start talking to them about their skills and abilities and the fact that they can see employment as an ambition, it changes their perspective and adds to their motivation to move forward. And I've put couples up there because it is something that has emerged recently, and I think it's a challenge for all of us in homelessness, is that actually working with couples, no matter how long that couple's been together, what we see is very intense relationships being formed very quickly. And I would go back again to that frame of reference that the people that we support come to life with. They come to life with a very different frame of reference from the one that we have. So their perception of what is a meaningful relationship and a sustainable relationship may be quite different from what we think. They tend to form couples very quickly and very intensely, and it's not for us to judge whether or not that relationship is valid or not. If that couple want to stay together, it should be empowered because that's part of what matters to them. And one of the big parts of the can that makes it work is that we work with people on what matters to them here and now, today, this afternoon, tonight, this week. And we're finding a real challenge in being able to do that for the couples that we're encountering now. So my call to the leadership is to recognise that there is a task force already happening, and that task force is delivering huge impacts for some of the most vulnerable people that we've got in the city. And that's those frontline key workers, because they are the ones that have the skill, the knowledge, and most importantly, the understanding about those individuals and their histories and the things that matter to them and how they come to life and how they make their decisions and how they're likely to move forward. So if the leadership can further empower that task force with resources and leadership and drive, then I think that's where we have a real opportunity to affect massive change. And we do need to make it easy. We need to make it much more easy for the most vulnerable to actually access the help. And as I say, systemically at the moment, we make that very difficult for people, and we've heard a lot about that already this morning. So I think those are the two agendas, and the development of the multi-agency hub will be a big part of addressing some of that. And lastly, I see from the can, I see from the work that RSVP do every day, I see from people that now work with us who have come their own journey, that nobody is beyond hope. And that's the thing, that if we're doing anything as a leadership across Glasgow, that we need to actually hold on to, that no one is beyond hope, and we need to just drive that agenda as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Lorraine. And our last speaker in this session is going to be Margaret from GHN. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. You sure you got the energy for one more? You're not giving that off, to be honest. Okay, so I want to round off this morning's inputs actually by offering what I hope It's a pretty clear message by the end, that the only thing that's going to end homelessness in Glasgow is housing. And the option really that's ahead of us is to make that as simple or as complicated as we like. Now, I promise you this isn't my first day in the job. I'm not not saying that thinking I've cracked it, but actually based on quite a kind of long observation. My job is working for GHM. We are the umbrella organisation that works to evidence and advance solutions to homelessness in Glasgow. So our core work is here in Glasgow. We do have some national programmes and a bit beyond. What we don't do is provide direct services. And I guess what that gives us is a little bit of a kind of unique opportunity, really, luxury even, to take a little bit of a step back, consider the long-term causes and consequences of homelessness, and to the kind of policy and practice decisions that have been made over the last couple of decades in Glasgow and across Scotland, and how that impacts on homelessness. And at the heart of all that really is bringing forward for us the unique insight of people with lived experience of homelessness. And a quick shout out to a few GHM volunteers that have got up to come in and join us here this morning. So I'll try and keep this at pace then. What do I point at? Is it maybe something in a way? So my name is Maggie. I work for, as I said, the Glasgow Homeless Network, and I'm going to be inviting your support, really, that it's housing that does end homelessness, and it's not hostels, shelters, separate, different accommodation. And it's based on a lot of evidence, but also Glasgow's experience and our long history and very complicated relationship with homelessness that Glasgow has had. So for me, to fix homelessness, I suspect we would all agree we need to understand it properly. And I guess over the next 15 minutes, what I want to do is very briefly, maybe I'll try and break into 10, very briefly, what causes homelessness, a little bit of a touch on what the specific Glasgow challenge is within that, and with a focus on housing, a little bit about where we've been recently, and not that recently either, and where we're going, but it'll be a quick step through. And just end in a couple of slides that, from my perspective, what is it we know now? And how can we use that to do what we do a little bit differently? Okay. So I guess coming in here today, we've all read the reports and stats, or in fact, a lot of that is your everyday work. So we've got a good sense about what the immediate causes of homelessness are. And I guess what I want to do is kind of try and just bring that a little bit further back. And to start maybe with that kind of popular idea that homelessness could happen to anyone, that we're all somehow just 2 paydays away from homelessness. And while in course, in theory, it could happen to anyone, it probably won't. The risk is not shared equally. We're not all equally at risk of homelessness. The very biggest driver for homelessness is poverty. And of course, locally, the interplay of local housing and labour markets. This chart that you'll see up there, it was created by Heriot-Watt University, but based on Scottish Household Survey data. What the blue bars are demonstrating is whether people have ever been homeless, the green whether they've been homeless in the last 2 years. And just very quickly, what that's showing is that we are 8 times more likely to experience homelessness if our household income is under £10,000 a year than whether it's over £20,000 a year. So the risk is 8 times more if your income is under 10,000. So again, what causes homelessness? This is a set of information that's taken from the most significant piece of research that was done on multiple exclusion homelessness specifically ever, really, a UK-wide piece of research undertaken by Suzanne Fitzpatrick and her team at Heriot-Watt University. And in terms of understanding homelessness, what they were able to for the first time quantitatively demonstrate is that it is indeed a significantly urban, male, white, single problem affecting men between the ages of kind of mid 20s to mid 40s. That most people experiencing multiple exclusion homelessness will have experienced a range of forms of trauma in childhood poverty, a significant driver of homelessness. A large proportion of adults, as we've heard already from the inputs, will have extreme forms of distress in adulthood, and Lynn described some of that earlier on. What the next set of bullets show is a set of sequences, and I don't want to get too technical in this, but it was significant when these findings were revealed, because what it was able to demonstrate was not just the complex interplay and that people have a lot of different issues, but actually those issues are in a mappable sequence. And that's important in terms of targeting our prevention work, that homelessness is in fact very predictable, but not inevitable. And if we can really look at our services in terms of where we intervene earlier, then what we do is we prevent multiple exclusion homelessness occurring, the type of complex homelessness that we're talking about today, because that form of homelessness arrives late, and that's what this research told us as well. The idea that people become homeless and then all sorts of other life experiences occur was kind of flipped in its head in terms of our understanding. Homelessness arrives late in a sequence as set out there that goes right back to adverse childhood experiences, severe trauma, and experiences that people have during their teenage years and their early 20s. Okay, and some of the specific Glasgow challenges. So I guess what I would want to just really draw out from this is that while a city continues to be challenged by economic and health inequalities, it will be challenged by homelessness, and it's kind of as simple as that. That our legacy of deindustrialisation, poverty, the areas that we have of high levels of deprivation create the perfect conditions for homelessness. The current challenges that we have in terms of housing access and location, although as was said earlier on, not necessarily overall supply, will impact, is impacting in terms of how Glasgow responds, and particularly that idea of hard edges. So silos of service provision and how they operate according to people's needs, but not instead across the kind of complex needs that people have. And I guess just against each of those bullets, there's clearly loads of other work and other discussions for other days happening across all of that. So the area I want to focus on for the next few minutes is that final one, that this system that we operate, our own homelessness system that we operate within Glasgow, and not just Glasgow, it's actually a system that the homeless sector has adopted across the whole of Scotland, across the UK, across Europe, the States. It's how we've done homelessness, and increasingly what the research is telling us is that we're doing it wrong. And that idea that we assume a set of staircase that people have to climb before permanent housing is accessed is actually holding us back. And that's what I'll kind of carry on talking about. Okay, so I mean, a very quick step back really just to reflect on some of the key issues that have happened over the last period, but just focusing on the housing aspects of that. There's clearly been loads of interesting and important developments that have happened, but I just want to focus on accommodation to put into context the description of Housing First that I want to end with. So going right back into the 80s, rough sleeping homelessness is known to be a lagging indicator of recession, a significant increase in rough sleeping across the UK. Problem that we had in Glasgow was exacerbated by the hostel system, the large-scale hostel system that we had at the time, so that people being stuck in that system or opting out of it altogether actually because it felt safer. This led to a 50 million kind of investment that was brought to Scotland, inspired by the success of an RSI in England, and particularly how that was operating in London. And this had an urgent focus on street homelessness and on access to mainstream accommodation. And during the period of 2000-2005, that RSI, that collaboration, resulted in a 50% reduction in rough sleeping in the city. And what was particularly interesting about that was it was a widely agreed success, and that everybody was kind of on board and accepted that had been the state of play. Thank you. Okay, so as many of you know intimately, what came in 1999 was a new homelessness task force, a national Scottish executive invited task force. GHN were among a number of people that took their place on that task force that ultimately led to the new rights and duties of the 2001 and 3 Acts. What that meant was by 2012, what we were putting in place at that point, a 10-year plan, weren't we? That by 2012, pretty much everyone would be entitled to accommodation to settled mainstream housing in Glasgow. And that's widely and rightly been regarded as the most progressive housing rights globally. Within that massive energy around about that time, there was a specific Glasgow review team that was set up to focus on the hostel system in Glasgow and the damage that was doing to people and to people's lives. So, recommendation of that review team was, of course, a hostel closure programme, and funding was secured around about 2003 to bring around 12 million of funding in. What that enabled was large-scale closure of the large-scale hostels, newly commissioned high-quality supported accommodation, where a great majority of residents that have been part of that closure process were able to report that their life was better, much better, or that they felt safer, or very much safer. Round about that period, we can watch Rough Sleeping stabilising reductions in HL1 count. The evaluation of that hostel closure programme attributed success to the level of resources that were input, the access to a large stock of mainstream social housing, and the experienced multidisciplinary teams. The two key recommendations that were given for going forward was firstly that there was a continuing need for supported housing for a minority quoted from the report of single homeless people, but a housing first approach for most single people in ordinary housing with flexible support was the way forward. Now that was 2010. I'm going to ask you just to hold that point, that final housing first point till I finish this quick chronology, because I'll come back to housing first as the key point I want to make. We know then we fired into the 2012 target. Everybody now has a right to a home. And according to the HL1 count, homelessness in Glasgow continues to decrease, as similarly across all of Scotland over the last decade. The housing options pilot that came around the same year, 2012, in the northeast of the city, the housing options model was one initiated with the Scottish Government, Marion Gibbs in fact, and the Glasgow pilot was a real good, innovative, well-resourced collaboration between the City Council and housing associations. With housing at the heart, again, of how we tackle homelessness, it really did intend to create a much more flexible, person-centred appraisal of a range of people's housing options and not making too many assumptions about where people are or where they've been. Now, the initial evaluation and ongoing evaluations of housing options, as we know, have been positive on key indicators, but I suspect where we've arrived is that we've recognised in Glasgow, and more broadly across Scotland actually, that housing options might not be, probably not, wouldn't be best serving people with complex needs. Okay, so back to the 2010 then evaluation of the hostel closure programme, that recommendation that about housing first. What academics were trying to tell us, that they had this swell of international evidence about housing first, and they were trying to pretty much get the rest of us to listen. And Turning Point did listen, actually, and acted very, very decisively by bringing a pilot of Housing First to Glasgow in 2010, which was the first in Scotland and actually across the UK, and it was the first internationally to target active drugs use. That this leadership, Turning Point demonstrated, created a real strong catalyst for a number of other Housing First pilots that were subsequently launched successfully in England, many still continuing today. What the independent evaluation of that Turning Point Scotland pilot of Housing First confirmed that significant successes had been achieved in ensuring stable housing outcomes for very complex people using drugs. And that those, and other gains in fact, and that those gains were comparable to all the other international evidence. So that the pilot that we're doing in Glasgow was every bit as good, if not better, than the evidence and Housing First pilots happening elsewhere in the world. But the problem, and while that pilot has continued to run up until this present day and expanded, is that other providers didn't follow in Scotland. And I think there was an expectation that we would start changing then, and it didn't happen. And what Glasgow also didn't agree quickly was the much needed scaling up of Housing First to take that from a project to a principle. And what we're able to demonstrate has been discussed, and I won't talk about numbers either, but just general trends, is that over the last period, over the last 4 years at least, we have seen steady increases in rough sleeping in Glasgow, and you see that probably as you came in this morning. So a very quick description then of Housing First. And Turning Point, in fact, are here, and maybe if they make themselves known, if they're at your table, they can provide more texture and colour to this. But what it is simply an international evidence model which has the most successful intervention for rough sleeping and complex needs. There is simply no other way of tackling homelessness, rough sleeping and complex needs across the world that has ever been evidenced as achieving the same positive outcomes as Housing First. And I'm sorry to say it twice, but it's worth saying. What it simply does is it assumes mainstream housing as the first rather than the last step. But it's not housing only, it's housing first, and what that means is the key addition of flexible, resilient support provided by the very, very best support workers and peer workers. It's both simple and radical, and the simple bit is what I've just described. The radical bit is that actually for us in Glasgow, and other parts too, it's not unique to us, is that it turns everything on its head. As explained, our current system is one that's based on this staircase or treatment first approach, that mainstream housing is somehow something that you work toward. Everyone is housing ready, and what Housing First challenges is established practice. What this image shows is a very kind of crude illustration, really, in terms of the difference between how we currently do homelessness and how Housing First cuts out several points in a sequence. And what's important about those points in the sequence is that's the opportunity for people to fall. It's the opportunity for people to somehow fail us, to do something wrong, to be late in, break a curfew, break a rule, end up popping back out the system, maybe back to stage one. Instead, what Housing First does is it adheres to the right to housing that everybody in Glasgow has, but also assumes people's ability to sustain that housing. There are a number of principles that frame Housing First. The principles I've got here are based in Housing First England's set, and we are in the process currently with a number of partners, including Turning Point Scotland, in modifying those within the Scottish context. Okay, so very quickly, evidence and outcomes around about Housing First, if you're not convinced already. It is delivering cost savings and better outcomes, so it's both cheaper and better. That the weight of the evidence is reliable and convincing in terms of people sustaining tenancies, the most complex people with the most adverse set of life experiences, sustaining tenancy 80-90% across after 2 years. Better health, decrease in criminal antisocial behaviour, gains in financial well-being and in people building and rebuilding social networks. The Joseph Rowntree Poverty Blueprint that was out last year estimated that if around 58,000 people, which is an English count of who they think falls within the complex needs bracket, if they were housed through a Housing First approach, that around 200 million per annum after 2 years could be saved. And it's worth noting here also that Finland have defaulted to Housing First for people with the most complex needs and are the only EU country with a measurable reduction in rough sleeping. The count, including, of course, Scotland as part of the UK, in terms of how that's counted. Not getting to that. Okay, we, on your tables actually, if anybody's interested, there was a report of a seminar that was held in Stirling last month. And Professor Sarah Johnson is pretty much the kind of key think person round about Housing First at the moment. And after all our evidence, she rather succinctly summarised it into it's a no-brainer. So, okay. Yeah, no, it's probably not worth it. All I wanted to very quickly say is who's talking about Housing First, and not to read those off, but just in terms of UK party manifestos, housing, academics, third sector. Currently, at the moment, people are talking about Housing First and wanting us to get on board with it. So where are we going then? So many people believe that this single change, bringing Housing First to the core rather than the periphery of how we do homelessness, could achieve the breakthrough that we need in Glasgow and across Scotland, actually. So scaling up Housing First. In In 2006, the Homelessness Strategic Planning Group made a pretty bold decision, actually, to endorse a policy position to scale up housing first. And at that point, we were saying, yes, we support that this is what is the right direction, but we didn't necessarily know at that point how exactly we were going to do it. What we knew we needed was a delivery and a funding mechanism that would enable that to happen. We needed a leverage. We needed something that was going to get us from A to B. There's been a new partnership forged with Big Society Capital, Social Investment Scotland, securing funding from other interesting places to create a new Housing First Transition Fund. What this will be piloting toward the end of the year is around kind of 3 to 5 million into Glasgow to allow us to transition to Housing First before rolling out. And if it's successful in Glasgow, we'll roll out across other places now. The starting point of that fund is around culture and systems change, that we need to do this differently, but also to do more housing first. We need to rely less on congregate homeless accommodation. It's not entirely replacing one with the other, but it's recognising that the balance of efforts in Glasgow at the moment doesn't properly achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. Our starting point also recognises welfare challenges, the imminent funding challenges for supported housing, and really this fund could offer the opportunity to mitigate the potential risk of that on people and also on their landlords. Supplemented with a package of support for transitioning charities, RSLs, and anybody that wants to get on board with it, really. Importantly, we're operating to a ratio of 1 to 2. So 2 mainstream homes provided for every 1 residential space. What that enables us is to simultaneously accommodate people that are sleeping rough or in B&B or temporary accommodation on a scaled, phased, safe, assisted way. That what we're definitely not creating is a new housing association. There was option when we were looking at the types of significant social investment that is possible through here. That what we could do is perhaps create a new housing association, bring private stock into social use, and create a new housing association around that. We didn't feel as though in Glasgow that would be appropriate. It would be peculiar to bring another RSL into the mix, really. So what we are relying on is working with some RSLs that are keen to show a bit of leadership around the issue. The fund will work simply by replacing existing congregate homeless accommodation with mainstream scattered housing. So if you imagine it's a 20-bed unit, this fund will enable the purchase of 40 private flats brought back into social use. Will transition people safely in a supported way using housing first principles into mainstream tenancies. On the basis of repayable loans, that this existing asset is sold, redeveloped, whatever, eventually repay the loan. And it means we can continue to recycle capital in a way that enables us to make that systems change that we need to scale. Okay, and final 2 slides and then I'm gone. What we now know, what we absolutely know, is that recession and policy decisions, especially austerity, especially on housing, and especially on welfare benefits, and the cuts that are being made to people's benefits. Having a talk with Andy this morning, the sanctions and how that's affecting people on a daily basis. That all those decisions have a significant impact on rough sleeping and homelessness. That this impact is most acutely felt in areas like Glasgow because we already have a high prevalence of all the factors that create homelessness. But we also know that the periods that followed the RSI and hostel closure programme in Glasgow proved that we can reduce rough sleeping substantially when we make an offer that is better than the alternative. And for most people, that offer means their own home is part of a community, which is the absolute best base for all of us to build and live our lives. That even the most multiply excluded people are ready for housing, and that this has been evidenced and can sustain mainstream housing with the right support. That when we don't provide a strong enough option for people, people just get stuck in a system or they opt out of it altogether. And we've heard so many examples of that in the earlier inputs. That to end the need to sleep rough in Glasgow, we need to rebalance how accommodation is provided. We need to increase access to mainstream housing and reduce our reliance on congregate forms of a living, because the current model as we have it has created inertia, and we know that, and we can prove that. And that finally, political commitment and targeted, I would agree, it's targeted resources work. Thank you.
Thanks very much to all our speakers. We are running outrageously late, so I'm going to still give us all a comfort break because I think we all need it. But if we can try and be back in 15 minutes' time. Okay, thanks very much. Right, okay, thanks very much. I hope you found that worthwhile working in your tables. From what I heard, it seemed pretty good and interesting stuff. So we're just going to round off today with a panel session. There's a microphone available for anybody and just a wee reminder that this is being filmed, just in case that's of concern to you. But I'll just kick off. I'll actually just hand the microphone along and just let people introduce themselves, remind you of who they are.
Hello, I'm Kevin Stewart. I'm the Minister for Local Government and Housing.
Lorraine McGrath, Simon Community Scotland and Street Work.
Hello, I'm Lorna Walker. I'm Senior Solicitor at Govan Law Centre.
Billy Mitchell from Glasgow City Mission.
I'm Suzanne Miller, Health and Social Care Partnership in Glasgow.
And I'm Celeste Singleton. I guess I'm your lived experience. I've just come through a period of homelessness and I've just got my own flat, so I'm pretty familiar with everything that's being talked about today.
Any questions? Don't be shy.
Thank you. I'll kick it off then. Sandra White, MSP from Glasgow Kelvin. Thank you so much. It was so interesting. Thoroughly enjoyed it. One of the ones I want to throw out to the panel, as we discussed here today, was about multi-agency working. There is some duplication, unfortunately, in certain areas. How would the council, the partners, the government manage to get everyone working together? Obviously, one thing is eradicate homelessness. Would we have we're talking about a Glasgow hub, but I'd already mentioned this. Social Security Committee are looking at an agency from the Scottish Parliament. If we were to have a hub in that, or we had an advice centre in that, how would that go down with the rest of the panel, particularly the voluntary workers as well?
I'm going to pass this along fairly quickly, but I mean, my initial response to that is yes to all of that. I think that's what's come out of here quite clearly, is that we do need to have that multi-agency hub model, and I think that's what we're going to be working for. But I'll pass this along, I think, to Suzanne initially, and then maybe to pass it back along this way.
Thank you. Yeah, very specifically, one of the things that I was describing earlier was the conversations we've been having recently on people with multiple and complex needs. And part of the reason we looked at Tomorrow's Women Glasgow, and we've got people in the room today who work there, was that what's really striking when you talk to the women who go to Tomorrow's Women Glasgow is they felt safe as soon as they walked in. When they walked into what was a multi-agency environment, they're not entirely clear who's from which agency. and that's seen as a good thing by the women, because what happens is the person they choose to have the conversation with and ask to solve a problem says yes and has that conversation. Now, there are points in the conversation where you wouldn't necessarily want somebody from the Scottish Prison Service getting involved in psychological therapy with a woman. So there is a point in that conversation where you need the specialist trauma psychologist to be involved. And the discussion in the about Tomorrow's Women Glasgow and its success has led directly to a conversation about what the multi-agency hub needs to look like. So some of what we know has worked in Tomorrow's Women Glasgow. It's our intention to replicate it. The other bit of Tomorrow's Women Glasgow that's been really fascinating has been the involvement of the third sector. And quite often what works for people who've had a bad experience and or are fearful of what engagement with the statutory sector might result in will respond really well. So we saw it in the night shelter with Billy and his team, that a really an ordinary looking table and tea and toast would elicit some of the most intense conversations with people that maybe talked to a number of statutory agencies over a period of years and never had that same conversation. So there's loads of learning from the winter shelter and Tomorrow's Home in Glasgow that we're taking into the multi-agency hub. It's not without its challenges, because to ask people to work in that way is quite challenging. So I'm not saying it will be straightforward, but I think we're pretty clear, as Councillor Hunter said, that we're on the journey there.
Certainly, I would echo what was said in relation to what happened in the winter night shelter. For me, as a solicitor, when I went into the winter night shelter, I did have a list of some people that did want to see me, but then I would find that when I walked round the tables, when people were having their breakfast and was able to say, you know, I'm Govan Law Centre, do you want to have a quick chat? You know, you're under no obligation, but it's just to see if I can help you. They would be more inclined to come in and have a gentle conversation, and then if they trusted me and they believed that I could do something for them, then that relationship was established and I could open a file and progress with it. But then also they would sometimes open up to you about mental health issues. They would talk to you that they've maybe not had a hot meal for a while, or they've had an abusive ex-partner, and you would be able to put them in touch with the agencies that were actually already in the building. And for me, that was invaluable to do that, not just be able to address their legal problem, but for also to be able to say, you can go and get your breakfast, or this is the Simon community. They'll actually walk with you to make the presentation. They'll text me later, they'll phone me later. I'll be able to follow up. If you're not accommodated, I can do X, Y, and Z. And the file was open, so it would be my duty of care to follow it through. But again, they could also go to the GP, talk about their physical or mental health needs. They might open up that they are concerned about clean needle exchange, so I could put them in touch with the Simon community. Having that all under the one building, offering, you know, a holistic approach and really fulfilling a duty of care that we all have, and we're all really in it together to help that person, was invaluable.
I would just quickly add that point of having a single person holding the threads together for an individual has been really important. So, and that person, you know, no matter what agency they come from or what their job role, if they're the right person to hold the threads together for an individual, then that needs to be empowered. And the other thing is data sharing and information management. And that's where you avoid duplication, because we all understand each other's roles and we're all able to work to each other's strengths in relation to that person, and not in relation to how the rest of the world views what our strengths are, but in relation to what that person needs and how we can respond to that person.
Multidisciplinary, very much so. I think that there's a lot of good work going on right across Scotland, but sometimes we're not very good at sharing information. There's good work going on which we need to talk about more. I am adamant that we are going to create some kind of interface to share that information so that we absolutely get it right. I think in terms of people, if you actually have somebody that you trust, it makes life much easier. And it may well be that from time to time there has to be a wee bit of swapping about so that we eventually find the right person to meet somebody's needs. One of the things which we discussed at our table, and I think this is extremely important and maybe a little bit controversial, is that if you don't have the empathy to do this kind of work, then you should not be the person who is the frontline contact for somebody at the most vulnerable point in their lives.
Okay, thanks for that. Now I'm going to pass the microphone right back along the table here, because I think we've heard from practitioners, but I think it's also really important that we hear from you about that kind of lived experience of what went.
What I'd like to say is that I'm just so pleased to hear the points that are being raised this morning, because they are so important. And I think the central hub is, I mean, it made me feel quite emotional to hear that there are people that understand what it's like to be homeless. It really does make me feel emotional because it's been such an awful journey. There's been so much rejection, and not we can't help you, just you're not eligible. I've been thrown out in the street with suitcases and nowhere to go by councils I don't know how many times. And I think the central hub with someone that you trust, it was the Simon community that helped me, and then they took me along to Hunter Street and I got a CPN, and I trusted her and she helped me navigate everything. But I was suicidal in December because I just felt worthless. I'm someone that's worked all my life, supported myself all my life, and a year and a half ago, everything in my life fell apart. So I'm not your classic drug user or, you know, anything like that. Homelessness covers so much more than people on the street. So I think the central hub, I think you're right, if you don't have empathy, if you don't care, you should not be doing the job. I've been treated appallingly at times, and wonderfully at times as well. Central hub, help people navigate. If you need to change that person occasionally, yes. If you need to keep trying with somebody, yes, always keep trying. Always. It's great, fantastic. And what you said, Laura, was so key. I loved it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Adam Lang. I'm from Shelter Scotland. I've got a very quick two-part question that's a wee bit more technical, but I think quite important because it talks to some of the underlying issues. The first part is to echo the points that Lorna raised earlier about those cases where there has been a failure in the statutory duty of the council to assess people as homeless or put them through that process, and just what the panel's view on that and what's being done to tackle and change that. And the second is, again, linked to that, the Glasgow City Council has statistically a lower level of cases, homeless cases that are closed with settled accommodation. It's 57% in Glasgow against 69% is the Scottish average. And of those, they have the lowest level of homeless cases closed securing housing association let at 49% in 2014-15. And so a bit more of a technical take, but those are two quite important problems that link to how we help people in need and the systems in place for them to get the support. So one on the statutory duties and one on the sort of broader bit of getting them the settled accommodation.
If I could start with the statutory obligations. There have been accusations in the past about Glasgow refusing to take homeless applications, which is something that has perturbed me. I have previously met with folk here from the council about this and made my view quite clear. If somebody wants to make a homeless application, then they should be allowed to make that homeless application. It's fair and well trying to give folk other options if that is what is possible to resolve their situation. But that homeless application, if they want that made, should be made. I've asked civil servants to look at whether we need any tweaks to legislation or guidance to see if we need anything done there, but I don't think that's actually required. But what is required is for everybody to understand on the front line what they need to do in terms of that statutory obligation.
Yeah, in relation to statutory obligations, I'm really clear as the Chief Social Work Officer, Chief Officer, Health and Social Care Partnership, that is a statutory obligation that we have. In terms of the point in relation to options that was made earlier, actually the evaluation of housing options in Glasgow showed that following housing options we had an increase in relation to homelessness applications, and we don't have any evidence in Glasgow that housing options and its implementation is acting as some kind of gatekeeping. That was one of the concerns initially, and it was part of some of the evidence from down south. So we actually set up the evaluation, which was done by Arnell Johnson, to test that. And what came back from that was actually that we had an increase in terms of homelessness applications following housing options. I think that's because what Housing Options allows us to do is have a much more holistic and not a tick box statutory response to people as they come in and actually sit down and talk to them. So I'm clear about our responsibilities, and that's something that I do respond to Shelter and Govan Law Centre when they raise those issues. We've got a specific escalation route with Shelter operationally at front line in terms of those cases. I've also been clear with organisations like GHN and Simon and others that there needs to be checks and balances in our system, and I'll respond to any situation where people are identifying staff that work for us not undertaking their statutory duties. In terms of the conversion in relation to, if you want me to answer the second question, in terms of the conversion in relation to permanent housing, that's exactly what the issue that we're discussing at the Housing Access Board. So we specifically set up the Housing Access Board to look at the access of people where they make a Section 5 application and what happens then in relation to access to permanent housing. It has taken us a while because it is complicated in Glasgow to establish it's not a housing supply issue. But as I said earlier in my presentation, where we are at is a partnership in relation to that between ourselves and the RSL sector in Glasgow is we need to understand more about why that process is taking too long, and also taking too long in some areas and not others. And what somebody's journey is there. So actually currently we're working with the housing regulator in relation to that, but we've separately decided to commission again an outside organisation to come in and do a piece of work for us and the RSL movement in Glasgow to better understand why it's taken so long in some areas than others, and for some people than others. So that's a piece of work that we're absolutely focused on in terms of that access to permanent housing. And it also features in our improvement plan, so it's something that the housing regulator has got their eye on and will be reported back to government in that way. Sorry, anybody else want? I think that probably was my question.
Thanks very much. I would also like to start, I've been working in health and social care for 41 years, and this is the first event that I've been attended to see so many like-minded and enthusiastic people around a table to look at solutions and to find outcomes rather than talking about what's went wrong, but let's look ahead, what can go right. But my question is to the non-statutory members of the top table, do you feel the third sector and independent sectors should have a more effective and a bigger part in managing and commissioning homelessness services in Glasgow?
Absolutely, and that's all that's been driven by the Health and Social Care Partnership and been supported by the Health and Social Care Partnership to develop the Homelessness Alliance, and we're in co-production with all of the voluntary and independent stakeholders round the table, actually having those conversations just now about what that alliance can and will look like. And the ambition is very much that the commissioning structure for homelessness will change dramatically from what it is just now, that drives us down those individual contracts to a place where we work cohesively and collectively managing the total resource that goes into purchase services, and there is an alliance of organisations that actually work within that to respond to need and to deploy those resources collectively, and we work together rather than kind of in competition with each other. And we're able to just come around the table and go, what's going to work, what works best now, what do we need to change for tomorrow, what are we hearing from service users, what are we hearing, what do the numbers tell us, what do the statistics tell us, what are the numbers that are coming back going to tell us, and how do we redeploy our resources, what skills do we now need to respond differently. And the gathered intelligence that will come from that will drive change, as well as the opportunity to make best use, so that we're doing better with what we've got and not just always thinking we need more.
I suppose it is just to say in answer to that question, we have recognised that we're looking to shift the power relationship, I would call it a power relationship, between the statutory and the third sector in Glasgow. There's some real challenges in there, because actually the legal system in relation to procurement doesn't necessarily make that straightforward or easy for us. So I think we will take some risks in there, but it will be, we think we think they are risks worth taking, because there's really clear evidence about that third sector led being really successful and effective in particular parts of our business, and all of the answers do not lie in the statutory sector. So for us, it's about shifting and changing that power relationship. Again, not necessarily straightforward, but I'm not sure there's anything we do these days that's not got a risk attached to it.
And if I can just add that what we're talking about is a 7 to 10 year arrangement. It's not a short term. So there's a real serious opportunity to drive everything that's coming out of today through that alliance.
Any other questions?
Hello, I'm Anne Craig from the Health and Social Care Partnership, but I'm actually asking this question on behalf of Emma Soanes from Unity Enterprise, who had to leave early. Emma was making a statement about sorry, I'm going to have to put my specs on. I've got the opposite problem from you, Suzanne. There's a variety of supports and interventions available at street level that, while rooted in goodwill and compassion, perhaps don't understand the bigger picture of what the work that's being done in Glasgow to try to resolve homelessness. And sometimes they can perpetuate the cycle of homelessness. Some of these supports work in isolation or even in opposition to others. And what Emma's asking is there an appetite to undertake detailed mapping of street-based voluntary support services, such as soup kitchens, etc., and determine on a joined-up basis what really helps and what should change?
Yes.
I think if I understand the question correctly, that there's absolutely no doubt in my own mind that 15 years working in Glasgow City Mission as a volunteer and seeing the growth over that. In Glasgow City Missions, 15 years ago when I was there, we opened 2 nights a week and we had a van went out on a Friday. And that was really it, because that was the response we had. We're now working 5 days a week, 10 in the morning to 10 at night. And the services offered by the third sector, Glasgow City Mission, Lodgenhouse Mission, and the Marie Trust in particular, it's not just, and no disrespect to Emma's question, soup kitchen. It's information, and it's accurate and valuable information. And we've spoken through here all morning about the trust. Sometimes when a person goes to Hunter Street and sees the NHS people, or goes to Hamish Allen Centre and sees someone at Hamish Allen Centre, and they don't get the response, or they're told, go away, or don't do this, or don't do that. When they come into the third sector, I'm not saying we're always, if I can use the phrase, just soft and cuddly. We are honest with them for their expectation. And I think that we have a particular role. It's taken, as I say, Glasgow City Mission, the winter night shelter, 7 years. It took us 5 years before the partnership with Hamish Allen Centre was concrete and visible. But the trust that I now believe has grown from that for this year and next year, and we will be a homeless shelter next year, or this coming year, for 4 months. We will run and maintain it for 4 months. But that relationship is through honest working. Now, I think that sometimes we're scared in some ways that, I hear figures here, I'm a lay person really, and I hear figures here of £70 million and this and that sum. We shouldn't be frightened, with what the third sector can offer at £100,000. That was our budget to run the night shelter last year. So that's 3 full-time staff, and then the other kind of some monies were involved to run that. Electricity, we can't get away from that, and foodstuffs, a lot which were donated. So we are more than happy. We don't want to sit back and say, well, if we open up to the City Council or to other council bodies, that they will give us cash. We don't really need the cash, but we need the assistance and the expertise of the council and what other agencies can offer. We really need that, because that's what the individuals, the guys and girls that we deal with, that's what they need. As I say, so we're honest with them, and we share with them. We don't hold all the answers. What I've found with multi-agency working and sitting in and chairing a meeting of NHS, Govern Law, of the different third-party sector and Hamish Allen, is that at the end of a day I can actually turn around and say to some of these people within that meeting, can you take Billy Mitchell's name away and help him? And they take ownership of it. They take ownership of it, and they go away and they'll report back before the end of that day to say, this is how we can help. And the delight that I've seen on individuals' faces when they're told of a success. So third sector has a strong and growing relationship with council partners, and that must grow. I'm here today and I've heard the word task force. I don't really think we need task force. We just really need to combine in a strong way and gather the information that we all have. We look at data protection very strongly, and we ask for consent from the people to share the information. And if they say no, we don't tell them. So the people who don't want NHS Hunter Street to know about their problems, we don't tell them. And that may sound difficult, but we deal with it. So we've got to take some risks out there, and we've already heard some of the risks around the floor. I've heard people talking about risk-taking. We can do it in a controlled and proper way by a joined-up process, and I would love just to be part of that, as would the Marie Trust, as would the Lodging House Mission and Glasgow City Mission, certainly. Good.
Absolutely, and I mean, and I think I would start by saying Glasgow is an incredibly compassionate city, and that is played out in the goodwill and the donations and the support that those small groups, which I would kind of call the kind of informal third sector. Most of us here are part of the formal third sector, but there's a kind of voluntary activist group's a good way of putting it. And it's a good thing, because that means that there's that compassion and there's a will to help, and the amount of support they're able to draw in, it's phenomenal, some of these small groups. But how that's been directed is not always necessarily helpful to individuals. There's quite a lot of short-term response within that. So, there's food, there's warm clothing, there's a maybe bit of human engagement, but that's not moving that person forward towards anything. And sadly, there is an awful lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation of both the formal third sector and the statutory response as a result, because there is sadly a lack of understanding about what sits behind that, what that person's presenting to them with on that day. And so being able to join that up somehow would be a really important thing. And I do think a big part of that is raising awareness, both of what the third sector is actually doing, what the service responses are actually doing, the numbers of people that are resolved versus the numbers of people who continue to have difficulty and challenge, but also what we're doing about that. But there's a fine balance to be struck, because it's an issue we've kind of wrestled with a lot, both as an individual organisation and as part of the CAN, is how do we tackle this? How do we harness that support that the Glasgow public are offering, but not do it in a way that demonises anybody. So there's a real fine balance between saying there's loads of services out there and people aren't using them. You know, because that's not the reality. There are loads of services out there and some people are trying to use them, but there's a disconnect, you know, between where that person's at and what that service is able to offer. But that's interpreted by the public through these small groups as failure, repeated failure of vulnerable people, and that's not necessarily what lies behind that circumstance, as we've heard today.
Okay, folks, that's us. Thank you a lot for coming. I think it's been a really, really interesting morning, and we've got a lot from it. We will obviously update you. There'll be a report comes out of this, and so we'll be back in touch with everybody who's attended to let you know the next steps. But thank you very much for coming. Your contribution has been extremely helpful, and I hope it's been useful for you as well. Okay, thank you very much.